We've been fighting a long time, and we have all lost so very much, so many loved ones gone. But you are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Ave Maria Stella Dei Mater Alma Atque Semper Virgo Felix Teli Porta.
Welcome everybody back to Steve with Sensus Fidelium, coming at you with somebody I'm trying to look like now. If you haven't figured that out, I got the Father Rip do going on. Father, welcome back. How you doing?
Thank you very much. Your hair is shorter than mine right now, but I'm waiting to cut it just before this weekend. But yeah, there we go.
I lost it in a poker match. So.
Oh, did you really? Oh, okay.
I blame my wife. She said I look better this way, so I was like, okay, why not?
Well, the other reason I ask is because when I was a kid, I bet this one guy when I was 6 years old, or in sixth grade, I bet this one kid something, and we both agreed that because it was kind of a lose-lose situation, if I remember it right, we both agreed that we would just shave our heads in order to make it right. So there it was.
So Father wanted to come up because there's been some videos, shorts, people putting out quotes that he didn't say, and people attribute movies to Father being a part of it, things like that. So we're doing another. Did Father Ripperger really say this? I think we're episode 3.
This is the third one, yeah.
We're going to do a whole season, I think. Is this going to be like multiple years of this? I can see this.
Yeah, I think from time to time we're going to have to do this only because, as we kind of get into this, I'll talk a little bit about some of the things, some of the behavior that people are engaging in does require a bit of a response on our part. I ignore most of it, but you basically want to make sure that people understand that, no, I really did not say that.
That's understood. So let's go without further ado. And I'm assuming there's a big podcast out there going on right now on Exorcists. So question, aren't exorcists are to remain unknown? Are you supposed to be out there known, like, hey, I'm Father and I got like business card underneath Exorcist? Are you supposed to be out there like everyone know who you are?
Okay, so historically, they were generally unknown, and part of that was simply because it was not necessary for them to be known, and part of that had to do with the fact that the church itself was actually doing its job in relationship to actually addressing these issues and giving people the proper catechetical response on how to actually deal with the diabolic. And then a lot of that started collapsing, and then the person that probably, at least from what I can see, and there had been historical writers on the topic, except they were mostly written in Latin, and it was accessible only to priests, etc., or people who knew Latin, and so they generally, where exorcists were unknown. And you can tell by some of these books written, like by the book De Demoniacis by Schmidt, who were actually in the process of talking with Tan about a translation of that work, because it basically takes all the different kinds of diabolic influence and shows how Christ was dealing with each one of those in Scripture. So it's actually very scriptural based. But that book, it was very well known among certain people, but it wasn't known among the people. As all this collapsed, and what ended up happening is the certain exorcists started making statements publicly in order to kind of rein things in and make people aware of it. So probably the one that is the most known would be Amorth, of course, which Tan is just about to come out with a book of theirs, which I wrote the foreword to on his official bibliography. So, and that one is actually very well done. But Amorth was the first one to start drawing attention to doing two things. One is the different kinds of diabolic influence and what people needed to be knowledgeable about in relationship to what they actually needed to understand about spiritual warfare, because so many people were getting mopped up. And of course, the hierarchy and priests were simply not doing their job. And so he actually started putting something out. The second thing that he actually did, which I think is quite important, is he desensationalized a lot of what was out there because of all the movies and things like that, because the movies were drawing attention to it. And there had been some books that were actually written on it even though the exorcists were largely unknown. But so historically, they were generally not known. But as in more modern times, bishops have permitted their priests to do a limited kind of a basis of allowing this to be known for the sake of people's catechetical education, especially in a time in history when we have a lot of spiritual warfare going on.
Just more like not like a pride thing, but do you know who I am type attitude. Like besides here, here's where my knowledge comes from because I am an exorcist versus listen to me because I'm an exorcist and I know better than you.
Yeah, that is a really good observation. Every time people introduce me and they tell everybody I'm an exorcist, there's a cringe element that I kind of go through, right? Because most of what I say should not, there's two parts to it. Most of what I say shouldn't be hanging on the fact that I'm an exorcist. In fact, a vast majority of the stuff that I end up talking about, even on podcasts in relationship to exorcism, you don't have to be an exorcist to know what I know. But there are times, and this I think is something which is even when I'm talking about topics that have nothing to do with exorcism, I really tell people, look, let's de-emphasize that because it takes away from the focus on these other things. I suppose there's a certain kind of a mindset among some people that as an exorcist, you have to be theologically correct, otherwise you're going to get mopped up in session. And so they figure, well, he's probably a reliable source, right? Which is generally true, but that's not always the case. I've known a number of exorcists who were not theologically correct in their thinking about even in the area of exorcism, and they ended up getting kind of taken out. And this is one of the reasons why I've always stressed on the necessity of following the church's tradition regarding this topic in order to avoid any kind of inroad, because usually what will happen is demons are always trying to get you to go down a rabbit hole. And so what they'll do is they'll start with a theological rabbit hole very often. And then the next thing you know, people are off in la la land. So one of the things that we commonly see among it's kind of dried down, but there was a phase there where exorcists whose theology wasn't very deep were getting sucked into this, the demons telling them, oh, well, there's angels and then there's demons. And then there's these beings in between called grays. And then, of course, you'd ask the exorcist, well, what did they say they look like? And of course, they describe an alien, right? So you're just like, okay, look, this is precisely the type of stuff where if people's theology isn't sound and if their philosophy is not sound, they can get sucked into some pretty bad stuff.
I think Matt Walsh is calling me right now about the UFO thing.
Oh yeah, it's just off the charts. It's kind of funny because I actually did do a podcast with some friends of a very close friend of mine who asked if I would be willing to do a podcast. And one of the things they asked about is the UFOs, and I just said, well, I think most of these are governmental experiments. Whether they're trying to get people prepped so that they can claim there's, kind of like the Orson Welles kind of, phenomenon, that there's this invasion or whatever. I don't know. I mean, let me put it this way. I trust our government so little that I wouldn't put it past them. On the other hand, I think that's a bit much, but there it is.
I like Carlin's attitude. I trust the government never. There was a great meme out there, which is all about memes. Will Smith, the enemy of the state, looking out his window, pure HD photo, and you got the photos of the UFOs. What is that? Is that a blur? It's not. 1960s cameras were better.
Yeah, it does really make you wonder.
So, what is the difference between your public speaking on exorcism and other exorcists that have come on the scene, and maybe even laymen that do this? Not do that exorcism, but speak on it.
Yeah, there's been a few laymen. In fact, one of them actually has a video on Amazon, and I'm like, wow. In fact, there's a point in there where he's actually doing prayers over a building. I'm like, ooh, man, I don't think as a layman I would be, if it's not my building, if it's your building, it's another matter. But if it's not your building, I think that's you're barking up a tree that could easily get you into trouble. But I think the principal difference is that I've always looked at it as I mentioned, a catechetical thing where I'm trying to inform people. This is how this stuff works. This is how You have to understand it, because my goal was to desensationalize it, but then also to get people's focus on understanding how this stuff works so that they could actually combat it well. Some of the exorcists that are out there, there's a bit of sensationalism that started to creep in recently. That's not the true on all exorcists. I mean, some of the exorcists out there that are talking, it's actually, I haven't listened to all their podcasts, but the stuff I have listened to, I think it's actually beneficial and it's actually good. There's a few of them that, because they're trying to be more catechetical or instructive, as I have been, and not so much draw attention to themselves as they are just trying to inform the people. I don't necessarily agree with everything they say, but then again, most exorcists don't agree with each other on absolutely everything. There's always some little areas, like one of the big, or not big debates, but one of the real questions is whether Satan or Lucifer was actually one of the cherubim, which is what St. Thomas says, or whether he's one of the seraphim. Well, exorcists are kind of divided on that topic. So, okay, I get that. You can have a differences of opinion on that particular topic. But the point being is that the core of the stuff should actually be very consistent. And you see with good exorcists, tends to be the case. Some of the exorcists that are out there are kind of Johnny-come-latelys on the exorcist scene. They might have only been doing exorcisms for 1 or 2 years, and they really need to get more experience under the belt, I think, before they're talking publicly about it. Amorth had been doing it for about 15 to 20 years before he started talking publicly about it. I had been doing it for about 7 years to 10 years before I actually started really talking about it in any kind of way publicly. And I've tried to de-emphasize that because I have other things I want to talk about in the public sector other than exorcism. And most of what I've said has already been said. But then, so some of these guys, I think they need a little bit more experience under the belt before I think they should be talking too much. But, I'm not going to criticize them necessarily for the things they say as long as they're accurate. But then there's a couple of them that are I'm not saying they do this. I know these gentlemen and they seem like decent fellows, but what they're doing is, they're sensationalizing, like, oh, I saw the demons walk up the backside of the wall, or I saw them levitate, or I saw this, which, okay, as an exorcist, you see that stuff, but that's really not the important thing that people need to be focusing on. They need to really be focusing on, how do I fight the battle well in my own particular life, rather than being caught up in that? Because what it does is it capitalizes on people's vice of curiosity, or the sin of curiosity, where people want to know things about the occult, which is not proper to their state in life. And it's actually an open door or a gateway for people to become diabolically influenced, to get sucked into this. We actually saw a little bit of that during, this was about 10 years ago, maybe about 15 years ago, when I was first kind of doing exorcism work. About 2 to 5 years in, some young people were kind of showing up on our doorstep with obsession and oppression issues, because there was a big kind of a fad there. I don't know if you remember this, Steve. There was a fad for young kids to go to cemeteries and actually do the, try and get that summon the dead type of thing, and some of them ended up bushwhacked over it. So, but it's the same kind of, and that was all based on curiosity. It's the same difficulty with sensationalizing this stuff. Quite frankly, I don't think that sensationalism serves any real purpose. I think it just draws attentions to the wrong things. It gets people distracted. It also gives people a false sense of, that this stuff, that engaging in spiritual warfare, it engenders a kind of a fear, or, as I mentioned, an undue curiosity, rather than an actual knowledge about how to proceed.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you said 10 years ago, I was thinking of the Conjuring series. I think the laymen that have that room at the bottom of the basement, their website, and she basically cashed in after he died.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think some of the problem is that people are trying to make money off of this type of thing, and that's a real issue, rather than trying to inform, which I do know exorcists that are speaking publicly that I think by and large they're solid exorcists. They're doing the right thing, but they don't have the appearance of trying to make the money off of it. Whereas some guys looks like it just has the appearance. I'm not saying they are. It has the appearance of them trying to make money off of it and trying to make a name for themselves. So, and even before I was an exorcist, for those people in the trad movement, I already had a name before I was actually known as an exorcist. So, And this is something which, I mean, it's true that as an exorcist, my name has become even more known. But the fact is that this was something which my focus has always been more on theology. But, that the whole Carol situation, with the Conjuring and all that, this is another one of those areas where, you can have differences among certain theologians and exorcists. But then there's also certain things in which exorcists are in agreement on, like you don't keep fortunae, that is, those things, the objects that have been cursed or diabolically influenced, because as long as you have them, they can influence people. People have the Carols had this idea that as long as you kept the item intact, it locked the demon in there and he couldn't do anything. That's exactly the opposite of what happens. It actually gives them empowerment to influence those things around them. And so, anyway, the point being is, I think a lot of the sensationalism, and I think that's one of the real downsides to most of the movies on exorcism. I think there's only just a couple of exceptions, is that it tends to draw people's attention to the more sensationalized and the stuff that's kind of far out there, rather than actually being instructive in the process.
And I was just thinking of your top videos on the channel are spiritual combat ones, demonic stuff. The sermon you did for Pentecost and the Holy Trinity, a couple thousand views.
Yeah, that's true. Although there's a couple of exceptions, like the one I did on angels, I think has about 600,000 views, and then the one on I can't remember if it's some particular aspect of Our Lady. I can't remember what it was, but it has close to 800,000 views. So that's generally true. I think, and part of it is I joke. I tell people, you can tell people that you're going to have an exorcist talk about exorcism, and you'll get 3,000 people show up. You tell people they're a top leading theologian is going to talk on some aspect of God, and you're lucky to get 50 people. And that just tells you where people are at.
Speaking of spiritual, a lot of people, even traditional priests, are saying that you cannot engage in spiritual warfare.
Oh, yeah.
What is your response to this? I already got a couple, I'm thinking Scripoli's book and, things like that. What do we do with those?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've had this tete-a-tete, even with among traditionalist priests, who say you can't do that. That's not part of the tradition, which is just a sign that they're grossly ignorant of the tradition, especially after you read my book, which is 828 pages long. The tradition is throughout the whole thing and actually talks about what people can and cannot do. But to that end, I want to read something. So one of the best moral manuals that was ever written in the last 150 years was a book called Moral and Pastoral Theology by McEwen Callan. It was put out, its original publication was 1929. So we're talking about something long before, the Second Vatican Council and our current discussion. But I want to read a couple of things from there, which sets the tone and completely goes against everything that you're hearing these people say. Which is important because it basically shows that no, even part of the tradition was a recognition that the lay people had to engage in spiritual warfare. The real question is how they're supposed to engage in spiritual warfare. That's why I tell people, read my book. I talk about it, especially the stuff on authority. Just stay in your lane, and you'll actually get a lot of success in your own spiritual lives and lives of your family, and then you won't get retaliated against. So, but I do want to read this one section. So this is from McEwen Callan. It's paragraph 2267. So this is, again, as I mentioned, this is one of the top moral manuals that even trads admit this is one of the best moral manuals written in English. So here it is. As to their private manner. So they're talking about, they make a distinction between public exorcism, which is what an exorcist does, like myself, where you get faculties from the bishop and you're actually doing solemn rites. That's different from other kinds of exorcisms. So as to their manner, exorcisms are also of two kinds, the solemn and the private. The former, so he's talking about solemn exorcisms, are made in the name of the church in the manner prescribed by the ritual. So it's chapter 2 of title 12 of the Ritual Remind of 1962, or the New Rite of Exorcism. So that's the one that you have to have faculties to be able to use. And their administration is reserved to clerics who have a special and express permission of the ordinary. So that's the faculties. The latter kind, so he's talking about minor exorcisms, may be even the latter kind may be made even by members of the laity. And we read that certain saints like St. Anthony and St. Catherine of Siena had great power of evil spirits. It is recommended that priests frequently use private exorcisms. So they're talking about priests who aren't exorcists. So this flies in the complete face of priests who say, I shouldn't be doing any of this. No priest should be doing this unless you're an exorcist, right? It is recommended that priests frequently use private exorcisms, at least secretly, for persons who are vexed by temptations or scruples, and for which they may use the form, quote, in the name of Jesus Christ, unholy spirit, I command you to depart from this creature of God, unquote. That section from McHugh and Callan flies in the face of virtually every single criticism that has been leveled against me and other exorcists who say that lay people can engage in it as long as they stay in their lane, as long as they don't do things they're not supposed to do, and same with even priests. But I think a lot of it is, and this is not to be critical of any particular priest, but I think a lot of the priests today, they don't want to get involved because either they're afraid of it or they don't understand it, or they're just lazy and they don't want the hassle that it would bring. St. Alphonsus Liguori says that even every pastor, he said, should be doing minor exorcisms or prayers of deliverance is what they're called now, should be doing those over the members of his faithful that need it. So this flies in the face of everything we say, oh, that's not part of the tradition. They're just saying that because they're trying to avoid the work and they want a comfortable priesthood. That's my take on it.
Just to play maybe devil's advocate, could it also be that they just don't want they're trying to squash a little bit, because maybe like the lady doing, remember you and I talked about the binding prayers, people going through every one of them, or like kind of overdoing it in a sense, and could that possibly be something too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a legitimate concern that people can go overboard, right? Because your focus, demons are one of those things that your primary focus should be on God. And the only time you focus on the demons is when St. Peter says, be watchful and vigilant. If you see something, then you deal with it. Otherwise, you don't pay attention to them. And so people can be hyper-focused on it. I get that. But on the other hand, the thing I keep coming across is lay people very often need help. They'll go to the priest for help, and he doesn't want to do the work, right? He just doesn't want to get involved because it's going to require extra work on his part. So I think there's the two extremes, but I think it ultimately just boils down to they just don't want to get involved.
Understood. People often ask, why didn't you talk in a particular video about XYZ? Do you want it next time you have a lecture just to stand up there for 10 hours and just make sure you can't hit all the bullet points, or?
Oh yeah, I get that. I get that criticism across the board. One of the things is I'll do something on like the nature of the church, right? Something like that. And then a sedevacantist or someone who's a sedevacantist will say, you can tell Father Ripperger is a modernist because he didn't talk about this in his video. Well, that topic itself is a 2 to 3 hour conference, right? So, and that's not even what I was talking about, right? Which tells you that the people can be hyper focused on certain things, and so this is something which I think is problematic. And it basically just boils down to you pick a topic and you have to stick with that topic in order to present it coherently and thoroughly enough, but at the same time not be, going off on all sorts of tangents. And so I think I get that. And that's a criticism that people say. Or another one that I see from time to time is, Father Ripperger is a company man because he's not talking about this particular topic and he's not doing this. Well, okay, first of all, usually the reason I don't talk about a topic is one of two reasons. Someone else has already done it and they've done a good job at it. So why bother? I just point people, just go listen to this guy. The other point is that there are certain topics that I simply avoid because I tell people it's analogous to, you might remember these, Steve, you might be just old enough to remember those. They used to have these glass or ceramic balls on the end of two strings. They were called clackers, and you'd go with them, right? The problem is that those things were brutal because if you just missed it a little bit, your wrists and stuff just got beat around by those balls, right? And so you had to be really careful with those things in order not to get beat up yourself with those. Well, dealing with certain topics is like working with the clackers. It doesn't matter what you say, you're just going to get beat up. It doesn't matter if your position is perfectly reasoned, perfectly incongruent with the tradition of the church, it's perfectly theologically correct. There's someone who's going to beat you up about it based on either their ignorance or their particular agenda. So I just avoid those topics because, I mean, people will, if they talk to me privately, I'll be happy to answer them, but I generally just avoid them.
It's almost like there's no win out of that. You can bring it up, you can say till you're blue in the face, but you're still going to get yelled at and rejected no matter what.
Yeah, and a lot of it is people have already they've already decided what they actually believe in those particular cases, so there's no point in trying to convince them.
All right, so the one thing about YouTube that they just started doing is shorts. Full disclosure, I haven't done a short. You put a gun on my head. I have no idea how to make a short, but there are shorts everywhere. So, and especially on you, I see your face all over the place on shorts. What's your response to people making shorts again? Just random people.
Well, I think that there's two components to it. Is the first is that, in fact, a couple of times people have mentioned, man, you're just all over the internet lately. Man, you just must be all over the place doing all this work. I'm like, oh no. If you pay close attention, about 80 to 90% of the videos that have been put out with my name on them in the last 6 months are, which by the way, remind me, Steve, because I have about 10 conferences I need to upload and have you put up. But I haven't put anything out in almost 6 months because you're the guy that puts them out, so you know. I haven't put out, and so even the stuff by where I was interviewed by Chris Stefanik, most of those shorts they're almost a year old now. So I haven't even talked. In fact, on spiritual warfare, other than what I talked about in North Carolina, I have not talked about spiritual warfare since that, if you exclude that one, in 9 months. And so all these shorts that are coming out are people lifting old stuff and just putting it out brand spanking new. I suppose it does give me a certain amount of exposure, but that's not my real interest. My real interest is accuracy. And that brings up a couple of issues that we actually have. In fact, as you know, I'm under a media licensing agreement with you precisely because not because people say, I can't believe a priest would be under a media licensing agreement. This is ridiculous. Actually, it is ridiculous. But we're dealing with ridiculous situations. And those situations are that people were putting stuff out with my name on it. It wasn't, as you recall, one guy was actually putting out videos that had my name on it, and it wasn't even my stuff. They were literally, people would email me, Father, you said X, Y, and Z. I'm like, I've never said X, Y, and Z. And then we would track it down, and this guy was using my name as clickbait to put somebody else's, because he liked some other priest's homilies, right? And then, or the AI. Or he would take the videos that you had produced from my audios, and he would strip your monikers and mine off of them and then put his on there and put it up as his own work. I mean, it was basically a violation of copyright. So the reason I'm under at least a media licensing agreement is so that someone can police it, and then I don't have to deal with it, because people literally put stuff out saying, I said X, Y, and Z, and I did not say this stuff. Or they're taking shorts and they're lifting them out of context and making it look silly. You'll also see this, that, when you're sitting on TV or when you're being video recorded, you can be acting completely normal, making normal gestures, but there's times, there's little frames that you can lift those out when a person's moving or what have you, and it looks like the person is out of their mind, right? And they do this to politicians all the time. They used to do it to Trump all the time. They do it to everybody all the time, right? And so, and even then, they can, even if not, then they can do stuff to the video, to pictures. So the point being is, this is a long-winded way of saying that yes, people are actually doing that. I'm thinking that we probably may have to move towards putting on the front of all my further videos that you do, Steve, and even with the ones that I do myself, is no part of this video may be copied, replicated, or used without the express permission, and that people are just going to have to get our permission, because it's getting a bit out of control. The other thing is, too, is a lot of times people are paraphrasing me, and the paraphrasing is not accurate. When I speak on theological matters, I'm extremely formal when I talk. I'm using very precise theological language. I'm making sure that I'm saying it the way that the saints had always said it or what have you. If it's my own opinion, then I'll actually say, well, my own opinion on the matter is, and it's kind of funny because I get a lot of people saying, well, that's just Father Ripperger's opinion on that. Well, I just got done quoting Pius X. So, it's not my opinion. It's what Pius X said. But anyway, all that being said, we may have to start tightening it up a little bit just to rein it in a bit, I think.
Yeah, we bring up the AI issue. I mean, people can clone your voice, and then we can't do jack about it because if anybody out there knows, I can go and find anytime someone lifts a video, it tells me how much of it does, how much of it is lifted. But if it's not the same audio, but the same voice, we can't do anything about it almost.
No, in fact, I have a prediction. I predicted this about 4 or 5 years ago because actually the ability to take your voice, if you speak enough, the computer can extract the voice signature, and then you just plug in the text and it'll speak it with that voice signature. Mm-hmm. This has been going on for a long time. In fact, even deepfakes now, they can do it with videos, essentially. So I predicted some time ago, photographs, audio, and videos at some point will be inadmissible evidence in court, unless you can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that it's not one of those three.
No, yeah. I joke with the AI I'm using for reading Butlers that people go, that ain't you. That's a better reader. I go, yes.
Yeah, exactly. But, actually, if people want to know, so here's the moral of the story. If you don't see my face on it, and if it's not my voice, then first of all, I would ignore it. Second of all, make sure that anything you watch, especially if it's a short video, like if it's less than 4 or 5 minutes, long, make sure that it's seen in its proper context. But also there's just certain channels like Sensus Fidelium, my own channel, Sensus Traditionis. You can go to the channels and they're actually from me. Christophonic has some of my stuff. Taylor Marshall, there's a few people out there. And then also I do stuff with Father Heilman from time to time. If you see it outside that context, it's unlikely that it's me. And so I've been telling people, look, just go watch the whole thing, right? So,
on that topic, the photos they use, they got some wild photos that they just somehow superimpose you in these not situations, but as sensationalized, just like that one with the big demon coming out of the ground or something. Here's Father's face and the atomic bomb in the background. And
well, the worst one was one which I actually had to talk to you about, telling those people to take it down, because they basically had one of these paintings that was done sometime where it's an incubus having sex with an incubus having sex with a woman. So that's the painting, and then they put my face right next to it. Well, all that does is make people's association with this vulgar, crude, obscene, pornographic thing with me. And so we finally had to tell them, look, and this is one of the things that of course, is always the issue, is people just don't have any common sense and decency when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why we kind of clamp down on that stuff.
All right. To the Did You Order the Code Red section of the program, did you say, I remember meditating on the Sacred Heart when I was young and seeing Jesus open my chest to remove my heart and replace it with his own. I then knew it would be painful.
I have never said that.
What brought that?
First of all, I have never had a meditation where I saw this. Second of all, that's usually not. Besides, if there were something like that were to happen in my spiritual life, the last people I'd be talking about it would be online. So what I'm finding is that people have. I suspect that when I was reading that actually sounds more like something that happened to Saint Margaret Mary. Mm-hmm. I'd be willing to bet that's came from her, and they've probably heard me mention because I have a strong devotion to her. Etc., in relationship to her promotion of the Sacred Heart, because I have a strong devotion to the Sacred Heart. So I suspect that's probably something that she had experienced, right? But that did not come from me. So, and I get that type of thing happening all the time. In fact, there's one guy that's posted a couple of times where people have said, Father Ripperger said X, Y, and Z. And there's a guy that keeps asking this, and I'd like to find out who this guy is, but he says, look, I've listened to every single video and conference and sermon that Father Ripperger's ever done, and I've never heard him say anything like that. Could you please give a citation where that is so I could go listen to it? Crickets, right? The people don't respond. And this is something that I think is a problem, is people just put stuff out there. I don't have a problem with people making memes where it looks like, they say, Father Ripperger said, and it's so ridiculous that everybody knows that's not me. And there's a humor element. I don't have a problem with that. Anybody who has a public stage is a target for that. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem is people putting out something that sounds like, something that they want people to believe in, and then they put my name on it. That I have a problem with.
I remember we were in a text group and they were bringing up your quotes, and I just responded back with "so."
Yeah, exactly.
All right, the greatest movie in the history of movies. I'm being sarcastic. I here's a good one. I haven't seen it yet. Nefarious.
Yeah.
What was it? Did you see or were you consulted in the making of this movie?
I have not seen it yet, and it just has to do with my schedule, because my schedule is so overloaded that I just haven't had time to watch it. I'll probably have to wait until it comes out online just so I can schedule during a time in which is convenient for me. I have not seen it. The trailers I did seemed okay. The Exorcists, the good Exorcists that I know that have seen it, say it's so far it's the best they've seen in relationship to Hollywood's portrayal of how this stuff works. It obviously does not deal with exorcism per se, but it does deal with some of the psychology. And I can't speak to it entirely. What I did see on the trailers is that they've been saying, even the people that wrote the thing and were interviewed, they say, well, it's kind of the screw tape letters put to modern, just put to screen. I think that if you look at it, I was analyzing, both how they were portraying the diabolic in the movie, and then of course I've read the screw tape letters, and I do think that that's kind of an accurate portrayal in the sense that the screw tape letters do not really get to diabolic psychology as such. What they get to is how demons drive our psychology, and so I think that that's generally true. So whereas the diabolic psychology, how demons function psychologically independently of us, is something that I've written in my book for priests called Diabolic Influence. If you're a priest or a healthcare professional, you can actually get that book and see how demons function. And the reason I went into that is so that, because in session, you'll actually see how demons function, that you can actually identify a psychology that is distinct from human psychology, both when it's mentally ill or mentally healthy, or when it's under diabolic influence. All four of those have distinct patterns. And so, and this is one of the ways that you can actually tell, this is more as a secondary sign of possession. This is likely a diabolic psychology based upon how it's functioning psychologically. So I didn't see that a lot on the movie. I hope to have a chance to see it. Was I consulted in it? Well, I was notified I was consulted on it. At least that's apparently in one of the interviews. I haven't looked at it, but one of the interviews with the writers, they said, yes, we consulted Father Ripperger. So then my understanding is they were asked, so you actually talked to Father Ripperger? And they said, no, we just watched his videos. So because when I first heard I was consulted on it, I went back and looked at my emails, because I keep every email for this very reason, and I never saw anything in reference to it. And so I said, well, wasn't consulted, but then they said they watched my videos. So there it is.
I would love to see if you made the credits.
Well, it's one of those things that if I were to be a consultant on a movie like that, I would specifically make sure that my name was not in the credits. Yeah. So there's two reasons for that. One is they can consult with you. Doesn't mean they're going to follow your advice. So they might put something really wacky on there, and I just don't want my name associated with it. But then on the other hand, I don't need that kind of attention anyway.
Yeah, I heard that was done with that one movie with the Chicago Exorcist priest came out probably about 8-10 years ago. he taught that when they used frogs in the term of lust because you say you couldn't find it, but he said they did some Liberty, but he was on the set, but they did notice that Hollywood took some license even with his consultation there. So
Yeah.
man, I can't remember the name of that thing. It was decent at least. Anyway,
Well, and one of the things I don't think that the people in Hollywood have ever gotten is that um, the reality of what we see in possession cases far exceeds anything they could possibly come up creatively. The reality is far more interesting and far more impactful than the stuff they come up with. And especially like one time I was talking to Father Gary Thomas, who
that's the
the
movie.
book, yeah, the book The Rite was made on. So actually, if you read Begalu's book The Rite, that's actually a decent book. The movie The Rite bears virtually no resemblance whatsoever to the book. And one time I was asking Gary Thomas about it, and he just said, "Well, it was creative license. I mean, what do you do?" I mean, and the stuff, the creative license part is all the stuff that's stupid and corny in the movie, which is unfortunate, but there it is.
Books coming out for you. Got any new ones coming? And what do you want to promote? I know you have some from the past. By the way, if anybody hasn't gotten the Holy Water book that he has, it's not you that wrote it, but you promote it because there's been some people that kind of go after you on that part too, right?
Yeah, there is. Yeah. So I just put a book out. Just I did it kind of quietly just to make it available so that when people complain, and say, well, here, read this book. So there are certain aspects where people say, that in fact, just recently a priest said that, but my observation that you can add, as long as it's not more than 50%, you can add water to holy water and it still retains its blessing. A priest, a very young priest, criticized me saying, well, this is just ridiculous. This is, et cetera, and that this is not true, et cetera. And that's just his ignorance of it. That's one of the reasons I put out the book, not because of him, but just because I'd heard that before. But the book also goes into a number of different facets about just historically. There were some certain things like on communion in the hand, which I'm not a fan of course. But there was historically, they did have communion in hand in the early church, but it's connected to the holy water fonts that you can still see historically in Rome. And so I left that in for the historical purposes of it. Later in the book, the priest said, well, the church, stopped doing that practice. And I just wanted people to be able to see the connection between the two, but also that. So yeah, I did put that book out. I also have Dominion, which is most people know about, but if you haven't bought the book, it's actually, I think, very informative for people, the lay people especially. It's thick, it's a long book, but there it is. Diabolic Influence is the book that we are kind of surprised. We did a first run, thinking that if we sell the first run in the course of 3 years, we would be doing extraordinarily well because it's only available to clergy and to healthcare professionals. And we thought we'd be lucky to sell it in 3 years. We're almost out. In fact, we had to order another run, which is kind of surprising. A lot of priests are ordering it. And it's like anything else in this area. If you write something very systematic in the area of exorcism, it becomes something which exorcists around the world want to know about. So we're starting to sell it even outside the country. So that's going very well. The next work, I'm working on 2 works. One is on the Sensus Fidelium, interestingly enough. And the reason I'm working on that book, which should probably, there was a public publisher who commissioned the work, which is probably good because I don't know if I'd sell a whole lot of it. But basically, the book is on, why is it that lay people are starting to recognize, a lot of these people in the magisterium are telling us stuff that's just not true. And I don't believe what they're telling us, right? So, for example, when the German bishops get up there and say certain things about, gay marriage or whatever it is, the lay people have a sense, right? No, there's something wrong with this. And so what I'm doing is I'm talking about both how that functions in the life of a particular individual, how it works collectively, and then how we are able to get specificity and have clarity about when something's from the sensus fidelium and when it's not. And so but the problem is, as I started digging into it, I thought it was going to be pretty easy. And then I realized that Well, people like Congar and the like wrote on it, and they just messed everything up, and they just muddied the waters. And so now, and then of course, the International Theological Commission puts out a work on it to just muddy the waters. So now I've got to spend time working on that. But I'm working on that's my work I'm working on. The next book, though, that's likely to come out sometime this summer is called "The Limits of Papal Authority Over the Liturgy." And I originally did the research. I did about 8 months of research. I just did it because I needed clarity myself about what are the limits of papal authority. I mean, can they just suppress rights? Can they do certain things? Historically, certain things have happened. Do they have the authority to do it? And if they have done it, what are the conditions under which they did it? And why did they do it, et cetera? So I wrote this book primarily for my own clarity. But then as time went on, I realized, no, this is something that priests need to know. So it's really written for priests. It's very technical in its language. I'm sure that most liturgists who read this will think I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's okay because I'm not interested in getting into the minutia about, that this particular liturgical element was in this missal, but it wasn't in that sacramentary. I'm not interested in that so much as I am, what are the principles that govern when the Pope can and cannot make changes to the liturgy, when can he suppress a liturgy, etc. And so I'm in the last edits of that. And so once that's edited, I'll be publishing that. So
fantastic. Father, any other final words? Appreciate you coming on and clarifying a lot of this for, again, episode 3 of season 1.
Episode 3. So there's 2 things. One is any of the books, you can get them through Centrad Press, so Sensus Fidelium Press. You can get those books through there. And plus some of my other books. I'm going to start expanding. My hope is this next year to start also reprinting other works, kind of like I did with this Holy Water book. Reprint other books. There's a few I'd really like to print, but the copyrights are held by certain people who are being obstinate in giving me permission to do it. But anyway,
surely no.
But yeah, and then the other thing is to watch more for some of my upcoming videos on your channel, which I hope people will start supporting your channel. If people haven't donated to your channel, I hope they would, just to keep the supportive of it, because it's not just my stuff on there. I think, I don't know if you told me, we talked about it once. How many videos do you think you have up there now?
It's about 6,000, something roughly around there.
Yeah, 6,000. I mean, there's no channel like it, right? And I think people need to support that. Because you do a lot of work for me. If nothing else, you appreciate my stuff on there, just at least support your channel. And I don't know if you have a Patreon or what do you have?
I got all that, yeah.
Yeah, you got all that. So if people need to support that because it makes it more available to more and more people. And I'd be curious, maybe you can tell me something. How many hits do you get a month?
I just saw it today. We're at 1.5 million views a month.
Yeah.
It went up from 1.3 beginning of this last month to this month, went up 200,000.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. So I just hope people will support your work as well.
I appreciate it. Don't cash that check yet or it'll bounce.
Yeah.
Finally, can you give everyone the final blessing?
Absolutely. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, super vos et semper. Amen. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Father.